Hi everyone, welcome back to Art at Home, sponsored by the Hoboken Public Library, and my name is Liz Ndoy. So the library has hosted or sponsored this series of art classes to help us get through this pandemic. Art is the best way to occupy your mind. Being creative is one of the greatest ways to relieve anxiety and stress. And in September, we're going to look at the art of Latin American artists, Latino and Latina American artists. Last week we looked at the work of Luchita Hurtado, and this week we're going to look at the work by a very contemporary, very young Latino American man named Raul de Nieves. Raul de Nieves was born in Michoacan, Mexico, and at the age of 7, he was brought to the United States to live with his mother in San Diego, California. It was quite an extraordinary experience for him because at that incredibly young age, he was put on a plane with a younger sibling with absolutely nothing. No luggage, no coat, no nothing. And he was terrified, excited and terrified both. When he arrived in San Diego to begin a brand new life, he was completely unprepared for the changes ahead of him. But he fell in love with art and making things. It was his survival technique, his avenue for expressing himself and learning to live in a brand new world. We're going to be looking at some of the arts that he did, and then we're going to be doing a project inspired by his creativity. Nieves was very influenced by the traditional art forms of Mexico. When he was very young, living in Mexico, he learned how to knit and sew and crochet and do beading. He had relatives that he would sit with and watch them do extraordinary beading. So one of his objects in creating what he makes is to show the world that these everyday traditional media are valid in the world of fine art. And he elevates what is the ordinary and mundane into the realm of high art and extraordinary beauty. Now we're going to look at some examples of his work. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with how different and original what he creates is. Raul de Nieves grew up in Michoacan, Mexico, and as I mentioned before, at the age of 7, de Nieves' aunt showed up at his school and told him he'd be leaving early. That same day, he emigrated to San Diego, California, and later in his 20s, de Nieves moved to San Francisco. De Nieves' art practice investigates notions of transformation, beauty, the human body, sexuality, and history. De Nieves references the visual symbolism of both Catholic and Mexican art in creating his own visual mythology. Nieves' references also include diverse theatrical traditions, including the circus, religious processionals, and kabuki theater. And you can see that he uses materials that we would not normally think of as fine art materials. You can certainly see the Catholic reference here. This to me looks like mother and child, Mary and Jesus. And he also has symbology from other mythologies. Here is a moon, 2 moons in fact. He uses sequins, which of course we don't think of as a material that fine artists would use, but Again, he wants to elevate the ordinary, the everyday, to the status of art. He also uses the vibrant colors that he probably saw in the traditional art forms that were being made around him as a child. Color plays a key role in Mexican art, no matter where you go in Mexico, and no matter if it's fabric art, paintings, or pottery. Really love the negative shapes that Nieves has created in the black shapes on either side of Mary's head. And I love the way the curve of these shapes is also shown in the curve of the moon and the curve of the eyebrows and the curve in this profile too. Nieves is very involved with performance art as well as making art objects. And it's hard to tell from this image, but this is actually a life-size creation that he's made. And he often wears these things, he calls them costumes, and they're made with beads and bits of fabric and anything that he can find, and the more colorful the better. He's written operas and plays, and people dress up in these costumes and perform. So he's an artist who works in the theatrical and the literary realm as well as the visual realm. I love the interplay of color in this costume. The reds and greens are very powerful together. There's quite an amusing face on it too. Not sure you can see it. It's a little bit blurred in the image. Definitely clown-like in its appearance. Often Nieves' work is about good and bad, evil and goodness. His plays delve into the meaning of life and all about love and death. His father died when he was quite young. He was only 2 years old, and that made a lasting impression on him as well. His father was only 33 at the time of his death, so quite a tragic beginning to Nieves' life. He also loves flies. You can see there's some kind of insect on the sleeve of this costume, but he believes that flies are a potent symbol of life and death and the circle of life. Flies often feed on decaying matter, and they get their energy from that. De Nieves is a multimedia artist, performer, and musician. His body of work encompasses narrative painting, large-scale figurative sculpture, ornamentally crafted garments, and multimedia performance. He questions the idea of disposability in contemporary culture and the interchangeable identities of mass-produced objects, from textiles and garments to beads and other decorative materials. And by transmuting these objects into beautiful objects with new meaning, he makes them art. De Nieves' artistic style is hugely informed by his childhood memories of watching indigenous people creating colorful beadwork and yarn paintings with painstaking care, displaying his pride in the artistry of his native land. And this one almost has a medieval feel to it. It almost looks like a suit of armor. It's not a very distinct image. It is a costume covered in beads and buttons, completely encrusted with all kinds of small jewel-like objects. And again, it's a statement with A visual statement with many meanings. It's about not throwing away stuff that you accumulate. It's about learning to love the beauty in small, everyday objects. And it's about using non-traditional materials in a new and exciting way. Again, this is a costume that is meant to be worn in a performance piece, but he also displays them as sculptures. And behind the sculpture, or the costume, you can see he also works on stained glass images. Although they are not made from glass, they are colored gels and tape, and they're quite formidable images. He was in the Whitney Biennial of Art in 2017, and he created an enormous stained glass mural that filled an entire window at the Whitney. Very, very beautiful. And his stained glass images tell stories. They are myths and really kind of stories that tell lessons and morals about life. Again, look at the extraordinary color that he uses. He loves bright, saturated colors. Think about all the work involved with this. Nieves does his work on his own. Unlike many new contemporary artists who hire small armies of assistants, Nieves does his own work. So it's quite a testament to his devotion and commitment to his art. Another one of Nieves' life-size sculpture / costumes. He's used fabric and beads in this. Considerable amount of beadwork. It's quite amazing. There's some crochet work as well. A lot of pieces of fabric. It's difficult to see, I know, but there's pictures of faces that he's beaded into the clothing as well. The color is more delicate in this one, but quite wonderful. Really wonderful. And you can see how these costumes would be great in a performance piece. They must move beautifully on the wearer. They must have a fluidity to them. And when the light hits them, they must give off a lot of beautiful glowing reflections. Really wonderful. You should go to the Art21 website and look up Raul de Nieves. There is a wonderful video of him actually wearing some of his costumes and performing in them. They're wonderful to see. There's also another video on the Art21 website in which Nieves talks more about his work and the influence of traditional Mexican folk art on his work, as well as his belief that we should reuse the everyday and turn it into art. He talks a lot about that. You can see the kabuki influence in this sculpture. Very, very, to me, Asian looking. Something about the way the lines curve around the costume. I love the voluminous pants on it. And this is all beadwork. Thousands and thousands of beads that he's adhered to the costume. And look at the magnificent headdress. Looks like he's used a lot of fabric and probably artificial flowers to create the headdress. So he uses a multitude of found materials in his work. Really beautiful colors in this one. And again, to me it feels very, very Japanese, very Asian in flavor. Our final Nieves costume. Love, love, love it. A lot of swirly things going on here, and again, really wonderful color. Lots of beadwork, I think also crochet work. This is actually life-size, although it looks like a tiny doll, but it's life-size. What a lot of effort put into this one. I like how he replicates these wavy, swirly things all over the costume. Makes it so fanciful and gorgeous. Another interesting thing about Raul de Nieves is he had planned to enroll in art school in San Francisco, but decided at the last minute not to do it because he believed going to art school would inhibit him. So not going to art school enabled him to follow his own path and to experiment in different ways. And again, he made these really giant sculptures using plastic beads that required intensive manual labor. He gained recognition in both the art and fashion worlds. He often works with discarded shoes, creating pieces that are more fantastical than practical, though possible to wear. And again, he made these wonderful faux stained glass windows and beaded sculptures that he presented at the 2017 Whitney Biennial. He now lives and works in New York City. We are going to look at the project that you can now create with materials that I'm about to show you and inspired by the wonderful, fanciful, beautiful work of Raul de Nieves. Drawing from Nieves as my inspiration, some of the media that I've chosen to use for our project tonight is beads, buttons. I have some bits of fabric and string as well, acrylic paints, brushes of a variety of sizes. You don't really need as many as I have here, but you will need a small and large brush, a palette, paper towel, and water. I also use for inspiration some Mexican dolls that I am lucky enough to own. And I am going to show you how to create your own Nieves-inspired costume using paints and beads. And I looked at these two dolls. I really focused on the voluminous skirts that the dolls are wearing, and they are the inspiration for the work that I'm about to show you. And remember, my work is just a starting off for you. It is a suggestion of what you can create after looking at Nieves' work. I drew first using black Sharpie, forgot to mention that. A Sharpie or any kind of drawing tool will come in handy with this project. I drew the dolls that I was looking at, and as I mentioned before, I really emphasized the huge skirt that the doll was wearing. And I did that because it enabled me to use a large variety of colors. I divided the skirt into these ripply strips and then proceeded to paint. So I used acrylics. They're a wonderful water-based paint. I like to wet my brush first, and I like to use a large brush for the larger shapes. I filled in each area with a different color, although I chose to repeat the red that you see in the top of her dress in a strip at the bottom to pull the composition together. Another thing to notice, I really filled in the background, bottom and behind the doll as well. That really will make the shape in the foreground pop out. Artists love to fill in the background. I don't recommend leaving it white. If you don't have a Mexican doll at home to use as your inspiration, look in magazines. You could create an abstract image. That would work too. So don't despair if you don't have a doll or object at home to use as your model. You will need some kind of glue. I'm using hot glue gun for this project. You can also use Elmer's liquid white glue. Both are fine. And if you like doing this kind of work, you might want to invest in a glue gun. You can get them very cheaply at Michael's craft store, and you can get them online. A tip about hot glue, it's very hot. Be very careful and cautious. I am now gluing beads and buttons to create a very fanciful costume, just like Raul de Nieves did in his larger works. But you notice he also used sequins and beads in his flat two-dimensional pieces as well. I'm sticking with objects in the same color family of the paint that I'm attaching them to, because I think it will give a wonderful three-dimensional depth to the work. So we're going to plug this hot glue gun back. So I'm continuing to glue more things onto her costume. And when I say I'm sticking with the family of colors, for example, right now I'm working on a pink stripe on her skirt, and I'm using red and pink buttons. If you don't have buttons and beads, don't worry about it. You can use torn paper. You can use colored paper from magazines, or if you have colored construction paper, that would work beautifully too. Even, I don't know, parts of pill bottles, bottle caps would work beautifully. It does not have to be buttons and beads, but I'm guessing most people do have a button box somewhere in their home. Even little shells or pebbles would work. I'm not going to do too much more because I don't want to take up your time. This is your project. But I recommend you cover as much of your work as possible. Encrust it with three-dimensional form, just the way Raul de Nieves did. All right. I'm going to glue on a few more beads. I want to show you how I'm sticking with the family of color approach. Actually, these are buttons, forgive me. You can use buttons, you can use beads, and fill up the whole composition if you can, the whole image. Let's pop on a few golden ones. And I want to reiterate, you don't have to do this doll imagery. You can do an outline of an abstract pattern or design. That would work equally well with this project. Does not have to be figurative. Just some fun shapes. I do recommend that you paint your composition first. Plan out where you're going to glue the 3D shapes. It will make it so much easier for you as you go. Oh, well, that one didn't work. Let's try one more, and then it will be time for you to create your own. Very hot. Be careful of the hot glue gun. If you do get to see Nieves's video on the R21 website, the man must have fingers made of steel because he doesn't flinch once while he's using the glue gun. All right. But even us experienced artists can burn our fingers too. Please, if you use a glue gun, be extremely careful. I wish you a great deal of fun on this project, and I want to tell you and remind those of you who are frequent visitors to our Art at Home series, you can find past lessons and this particular lesson at the Hoboken Library website. I hope you watch this one and get a lot of enjoyment out of what you create after being inspired. And I hope that you go back to the older ones to see and learn about other artists and other techniques. Again, art on, have fun. This will help you relax and forget all of the difficulties we're faced at the present time. Enjoy. And I will see you next week. We will look at another Latino or Latina American artist.